I dealt with today, and who I've passed on to Nikki. She's 78, and her quote was, "I'm prepared to live on bread and water if this pain never comes back." She'd been to her GP here in town and had been put on the low FODMAP diet, and in 3 days, she said, the pain's gone. The burning that she lies with every night, you can't sleep with. So, everyone's different. Right, here's my talk, which is covers some of the same ground. Mum comes in. His tummy always hurts, and I think it's what he eats. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of you are feeling, I've dealt with this for a very long time because of my allergy work. So for a long while, I got patients like this, and I thought, okay, it's a food allergy. I'll just test them. And I learnt after a while that most of these people did not have food allergy. And that's why yes, there was a time when I felt the same when these people walked in. I used to secretly dread having to deal with this. But it's a common complaint. I know you've all heard it. And here's a cartoon by somebody who clearly has abdominal problems and has been to the doctor. You can just feel the frustration. That answer's not good enough. So what can cause this sort of thing? So I just wrote down a list, which is probably not comprehensive. So food allergies, celiac disease, non-allergic food reactions. In other words, things like F-pies, the oral allergy syndrome, food chemicals and food additives, irritable bowel syndrome, psychological things like food aversion and Munchausen syndrome, parasitosis, all of these things. And then, of course, the real diseases, inflammatory bowel disease, ulcers, reflux. So you really are, it takes a lot of experience to approach a patient like this with some sense of confidence. And here's a patient I can tell you about. 31-year-old French lady from Matamata. Generalized abdominal pain, which did improve a bit after going gluten-free some years before. Very common story with these patients is that they've been to a naturopath. They've exhausted the goodwill and knowledge of their GPs and have gone to a naturopath. And the naturopaths all say the same thing: go gluten-free and dairy-free. She'd had right upper quadrant pain for years, episodic bleeding, and episodic bouts of diarrhea. And to pick up on Nikki's point, these people can get really desperate. They literally can't go further than round the block, because when the call comes, they need a toilet now. They can't go out to restaurants. They can't stay the night with friends. She'd, of course, been to a gastroenterologist, courtesy of her GP. He'd scoped her top and bottom, thought it could be cholelithiasis, but ultrasound only showed a fatty liver. She had persistent dyspareunia, pain especially on the right. She also had persistent bacterial vaginosis, resistant to treatment. So, of course, she went to a gynecologist. He sort of did his what do you call it, laparoscopy, and found one or two little spots of endometriosis that he felt were too small to actually do anything about, but he thought they might be the cause of her symptoms. She had a couple of weird peripheral symptoms. When the pain strikes, she sweats heavily. We get these patients, I know they're rare, with hyperhidrosis, people who literally can sweat droplets off their hands. She had sort of restless leg syndrome even at her age, and her feet got boiling hot when the pain struck. She was a lovely person, so French, bubbly, but she was getting really worn down by this. Social anxiety, social withdrawal. Was she going to be always like this? Is this going to be her life? And of course, the debilitating effect of chronic pain and lack of an answer. So she finally got a referral to the allergy clinic to, of course, discuss food allergy. So I took a detailed history. We did a test. I advised her to do something, and she came back 3 weeks later with no more symptoms. So there is no bottle of wine for guessing what test we did, or especially not for Nikki, or what we advised her to do. But she came back a very happy customer. Her life was renewed. She was looking forward to going back with full attention to her teaching, passionate teacher, and no more dyspareunia, which is clearly rather important. Her husband they were farmers, and I made the comment to her, and that's what that cow's doing there, that maybe her husband owed me half a cow. And she made the point that she thought at least one cow was the minimum he owed me. So there are a couple more illustrative cartoons. And I know there's probably at least one person in this audience with irritable bowel syndrome. The bloating. Women regularly tell you that by evening time they look 9 months pregnant, or by morning time, whatever it is. There's the image here of someone just sitting on the toilet, especially children, for hours, or going back and forth, with minimal bowel production, but this feeling that they're not empty. 4 times diarrhea in a day, common story. And some of these people think that's normal. You ask them if their bowel function is normal, they say yes. You ask, what does that mean? 4 times a day, that's not normal. So what is the science behind IBS? I was working in Australia, actually, when I went one evening to one of the many, many drug rep dinners that they have there. Here we have none, almost none. There were 3 or 4 a week, and I made sure I went to at least 2. And one of the talks was by this young woman called Sue Shepherd, and she told us her story. She was a dietitian. She was a recently graduated dietitian who was working in the gastro department at Melbourne Hospital. And she worked for a year and earned enough to go off on her OE. And near the end of the year, the professor came down to her and said, I hear you're leaving. What? He said, you have done the most amazing work with our irritable bowel patients. What have you been doing? And she told him how she'd, carefully analyzed the foods they told her about, and using her knowledge of food had worked out that the probable cause of this was one of these 2 sugars, either fructose or lactose. And apparently he said to her, well, look, don't go, there's a PhD in this for you. And a few years later, she's now Dr. Shepherd and doing very well, and deservedly so, because she pretty much single-handedly gave us the answer. Before this, and it's still in some of the textbooks in the library, Before this, it was recommended antispasmodics and psychotherapy was the treatment for irritable bowel syndrome. And I've actually met a mother who sat down with her daughter, and first words to me were, she looked me in the eye with a very fierce look. She said, "If one more doctor tells me that my daughter's problems are in my head, I'm going to kill him." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." So what is the science about these two sugars? They're different, obviously. Fructose is a monomeric sugar, and lactose is a dimer. Lactose intolerance is based upon lactase deficiency, where you cannot absorb disaccharides through the intestinal mucosa. So if you can't split it, it's not absorbed. Fructose intolerance is a little more complicated. It seems that there are a couple of receptors for fructose in the bowel, and these don't work properly, whatever that means. The complication is that if you've got an equal amount of fructose and glucose in the meal, it seems you can absorb that fructose. But once the meal starts including excess fructose compared to glucose, the excess fructose is not absorbed and stays in the small intestine. So what happens? It stays in the small intestine, and over the course of an hour or so, it's squeezed down into the colon. And one major difference between the colon and the small intestine is the number of bacteria. So the small intestine is, well, it's not sterile, but relatively sterile. There might be a few thousand bacteria per cc. The colon is essentially wall-to-wall bacteria. Feces is something like 60% bacterial material. So these waiting bacteria, the news goes around. Someone's brought drugs, right? There's a load of sugar coming down, and there's a big party, and you get fermentation. Now, it's anaerobic in the colon, so you get anaerobic fermentation, and the products of that are organic acids and some gases, mainly hydrogen, but also methane. And it's these, from that you get your clinical symptoms of bloating, pain, cramp, and in ladies, bloat, in men, farting. So some of this hydrogen is absorbed into the bloodstream and is breathed out, and we can pick that up with different machines. Mine is just a little machine which picks up hydrogen only. That only cost me $4,000. The one that they've got at Braemar, I think it costs $16,000. It picks up hydrogen and methane, which is useful in some cases. So that's the science behind it all. So what is the test we did on this lady? We did a fructose tolerance test. We fed her 65 grams of fructose in water. And at time 0, we took a reading on the monitor. Then every quarter of an hour for an hour, followed by every half an hour for the next 2 hours after that, we take readings on the machine. And we get different, this is just 10, 12 consecutive random patients. You get different kinds of traces. You get people like this green on the bottom who are negative to start with and never have any spike. And you've got to call them negative IBS tests. If they also have no symptoms during work, they talk to the If they also have no symptoms during the treatment, the test, then it's a negative test. They are not fructose intolerant. On occasion, you get sort of confusing sort of hydrogen readings, but they have very clear clinical symptoms of diarrhea or severe pain or worse. And I guess you can call those a positive. Maybe they're producing methane, not hydrogen. But your simplest case is like the guy right at the top, Nothing, nice and negative to start with. Already by 30 minutes, they're producing a whole lot of hydrogen. And they peak out, and then it slowly drops away. So we do that. So that was the test we did. And what did we tell her to do? And I will say in all humility, I'm a complete beginner here. I'm not a dietitian, and I'm quite sure that I mess things up for you horribly, Nikki, but that's who I am. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Before I come to the low FODMAP diet, there's no science here, it's just listening to patients, and the number of times I've heard these associated conditions has got to be more than coincidence. So of course you get mid-abdominal pain, bloating and diarrhea, urge, incontinence, fecal incontinence, and you can get diarrhea alternating with constipation. That is the definition of IBS. You can also get water brash, medication-resistant reflux. I put that down to simple pressure. Pressure inside the abdomen from the gas, forcing things up and down. In women, recurrent vaginosis and thrush. Resistant to treatment. They come back every 2 bloody weeks or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, wanting more Canesten, more fluconazole. In every case, when I've asked them, and I don't have that many cases, they've got IBS. Itchy perineum, itchy bottom. Frequent urinary tract infections, especially in women. One of them or two of them have had interstitial cystitis, whatever that means. Then hyperhidrosis, and also temperature dysregulation. They feel hot or they feel cold. And everybody else says it's not hot and it's not cold. Then this lot, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, feeling fuzzy. They say, I've got brain fog. When my tummy's sore, I can't think. And feeling just off. They're always off. I never feel good. Non-alcoholic hepatic steatosis, fatty liver. Stubborn weight gain. I remember one woman telling me, I've got a personal trainer. I'm on 800 calories a day. I exercise 7 days a week. I can't lose weight. And then, of course, behavioral things, especially in children. Anxiety. So a lot of these things I try and understand as a crosstalk between the autonomic nervous system that runs the abdomen and the other functions of the autonomic nervous system, like sweating, mucosal behavior, hormonal behavior. They say that there are more neurons in the gut than in the brain, which is, if it's true, that's really saying something. So really, when the gut's unhappy, it's no surprise that all the other systems in your body can be unhappy. Right. The other very interesting thing about IBS, of course, is this biome story. If you want to do research in medicine, all you have to do is something about the microbiome. Everything you do will be publishable. We're at that stage of the game. We do not understand the colon. We don't understand the bugs that grow in the colon. I've just put this slide in. I won't go in great detail through it, but it's so difficult to tell the relationship between stress, what is stress and what is IBS, because the one is so tightly linked to the other. So anyway, I'll leave that there for you to puzzle over if you want to get the slides. So we told this lady to go on the low FODMAP diet. And I do tell them, look, this is a highly simplified diagram. It's to stick up on your fridge. It's a guide. And if you are not having success, you need to see a specialist dietitian. And some of them do come back, like this lady today, the 78-year-old, just a couple of days later. And they say, I'm a new person. I love it. And you can find a lot on the web about low FODMAP diets. A lot of it is just too complicated, and Nikki's made the whole point about the social aspect of food. It's not easy. So, summary. A common condition. For most people, there's a solution. Do not despair, as the doctor. Don't feel that you just wish this 15 minutes were over. And when we fix these people, they are truly grateful. So there you go.
Can I ask a question?